Well, greetings tonight, everyone. Welcome to the premiere episode of the Dead Astrologers Society. We are so happy to have this new show on the Paramania Radio Network because we have the opportunity to tell all of you about the wonderful world of astrology. And you're in for a treat tonight because we have a full house full of guests with a lot of different perspectives on what astrology is, how it works, and how it's been perceived by different cultures throughout time. It should be a lot of fun. So let me take just a minute to tell you about how this show got started, and then I'm going to introduce our fabulous guests, and we are going to take off on a grand adventure, an exploration of the topic, what is astrology? So my name is Donna Woodwell. I am a professional astrologer, and a few months ago, I was in the middle of a Facebook discussion group where I always invite some of my friends who are actually dead astrologers. I don't know if many of you realize that in Facebook, if you actually pass away, you still have a Facebook profile even after you have died. And one of the people in the group figured out I have invited dead people to some of my groups and pointed out, hey, they're dead, don't invite them. And my dead astrologer friend, I could hear her laughing and saying, but wait, dead astrologers like having fun too. So I set up a Facebook group just for them, for the dead astrologers, and called it the Dead Astrologer Society. And then one thing led to another, and it became a fabulous idea for a radio show so that we could explore astrology in depth. The history of astrology, go beyond the idea of what most of us are familiar with, that there are 12 sun signs and we are one of 12 categories, when professional astrologers have much larger view of what astrology is than just those 12 signs. And so we are going to spend a lot of time together over the next months and maybe even longer talking about what some of those ideas are. So, without further ado, tonight I have brought together a fabulous group of people who all have interesting perspectives on this topic. And these include Miss Heather Horton, who I'm sure many of you know. There's Heather Horton from her own radio show, which has been the Heather Horton Hour. She will be starting a new one of her own very soon called Planet Soul for call-in advice. The lovely Heather. We also have the psychic astrologer and former journalist from Canada, Lesley Francis. Say hi, Lesley.
Hi, Donna.
Lesley Francis has some great insight on how astrology and intuition can work hand in hand. And I'm sure she'll be sharing some of that with us. We also have with us Enid Newberg. Hi, Enid.
Hello.
Enid is in Washington. She is the president of Kepler College, which is one of the largest U.S. colleges of astrology. So she has seen students come to astrology and learn from the very beginning, has seen classes all the way from every flavor of astrology you can imagine, from modern Western astrology to traditional Western astrology to Vedic astrology. And for I know many of us in our audience, all I'm saying is wah, 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 astrology. But we're going to talk about that throughout the course of the show. It's such a rich cultural phenomenon from places all over the world and times all over the world that there's a lot of different ways that we are fertile ground for discussion. And finally, last but not least, we have Joseph Crane, who is a scholar of astrology in his own right. He is yes, he's our professor tonight.
Classically trained, all right.
Yes, the classically trained astrologer in Hellenistic astrology. Now, what that means is that's the time when the Greek Empire stretched from India all the way through to Egypt, around 0 BCE or AD, however you want to say it, to about 400 AD or CE, however you want to say it. And he specializes in that area, but he also has some fascinating insights onto the history of astrology. He's just had a book come out on astrology in the book Dante, which is from the 14th century medieval literature. Great insights who can help us fill in the gaps for where we have been for astrology. So, and with me I said we've got all of our astrologers here. We also have my friend Deb Antic. She is actually the founder of the Traveling Psychic Supper Club, and just happened to stop by in the studio, otherwise known as my home office, in order to join us for this conversation, as well as Chad McKenzie, who is the host of Paranormally Correct. He's the producer of this show, but he's actually joining us on air live because the two of them want to know more about astrology. So we thought they'd help out with the conversation by helping us ask some questions. Astrologers can get very much in our heads in our own language. So we have a couple people here live on the phone call to keep us honest. So, how's that for an introduction?
That's fantastic.
We went fast. Say hi, Chad.
Hello.
There you go.
I love his voice on air.
Yeah, he sounds great, doesn't he? Okay, so without further ado, let's start the conversation. Let me throw this out to anyone who wants to take it, but I think Enid and Joseph will jump in first. Where does astrology come from? Isn't that a question to start with?
Astrology.
Okay, what is astrology? There's a good one.
People have been looking at the heavens for signs of the gods' wrath or benevolence for a very long time in a lot of different cultures. And I think the astrology that we practice was put together during the in the Hellenistic age, probably in Egypt around 2nd century BCE. And it combined a lot of different things like Babylonian astronomy and Greek physics and Greek metaphysics, as well as some material from Egypt. And they came up with the zodiac and the houses and the planets having significance. And astrology's been around since then in a lot of different forms, and it hasn't gone away, even though cultures have come and gone. Kingdoms have come and gone. Empires have come and gone. Astrology sticks around. It's amazing.
In spite of a remarkable effort to consider it completely dead and gone in the... I've been browsing through different things in the 17 and 1800s, and like there's this one book on medicine that was talking about the history of medicine, which is connected very closely with astrology, and just coming out with, it's completely dead and gone now, but this pseudoscience that never had any validity used to be totally part of our practice. It was a very curious, like this obligatory, I must dismiss this subject, while at the same time acknowledging that the history of medicine was totally tied up with it.
Right. I mean, Augustine, in his writings, Augustine was an astrologer earlier in his life.
Saint Augustine was an astrologer.
What's that? Saint Augustine. Oh, yeah.
The guy who wrote the Confessions that we had to read, back in my Catholic days.
Right. There's a lot of stuff in the Confessions trashing astrology. He obviously knew it well. And, he thought that astrology was your basic pagan thing, that it was on its way out. Now that we have Christianity, things are going to be great from here on, and who needs that stuff? Well, astrology came back big time and was pretty much part of the medieval Christian worldview up to the modern era. So it has this tenacity as a study. And it'd be interesting to explore why it stuck around. What kind of needs does astrology meet for people that have endured over time?
Well, that's a good question for everyone.
Well, I think it has a resonance that speaks to where people live in terms of their internal reality as much as their external reality. So you can't get rid of those things that speak to people.
So let's take a step back. When you say that it has an internal resonance, what exactly does that mean? It still comes back to the question of what is astrology? What do we do?
Excuse me. Today on Facebook I posted a quote by Stephen Forrest, and he said, astrology is just a finger pointing at reality. Just to spin it up a little bit, what is astrology? It's the as above, so below. It's the in and out. It's the essence of all that is, said the sage.
It's that there's got to be some meaning here. Because really, ultimately, when we're looking at the sky and making all these statements as astrologers, we're proclaiming that we live in a universe that we're not a separate piece of. We're an integral part of. And all those things that are happening out there have a resonance, I think that's a good word, to who we are inside and in here. So it's kind of hard to get rid of something like that, because when you stand beneath a sky, if you have the luck of being out from a city, especially if it's like on a dark night without a moon and the Milky Way and the stars, it's like they just strike you down to the heart of your being. How can you say there isn't any connection there between what's out and what's within when you have that type of experience? Makes sense to me that astrology just keeps hanging in.
Astrology continues to re-enchant the world. I think there's certain, as you say, there's magic in being out and under the stars and wondering at the pattern that connects. And for those people who don't know much about astrology past reading a horoscope in a magazine, when we're talking about astrology as astrologers, what we're doing is making a map of that entire sky and where all the different pieces of it are, and then talking about it as if it's a symbolic language that helps us to describe any person, any moment in time, really anything that has a beginning. And it's that symbolic language, for lack of a better terminology, that cultures around the world have used to help them understand the soul of things and the psyche of things that may not always be visible on the surface. Is that what do you think for definitions?
That's pretty good.
Yeah, that was pretty good. Joseph Campbell is what comes to mind when you talk like that. The hero's journey and the myths that are all attributed to that. We can look into astrological study beyond the sun sign horoscopes and find that it all mirrors each other in multiple dimensions through psychology and sociology and physiology, and I mean every ology everything falls under the umbrella of astrology. Everything.
Go ahead.
I was going to say that's so true, because it can be used to describe a moment that allows you to make practical decisions, as well as using it as a tool for self-revelation. Mm-hmm. Really, in my mind, there isn't anything that astrology can't do.
Which is also why it's problematic, because, if you're going to be, very scientific, there's all kinds of places where you go, but how? Why? What's the cause behind it? And there's this desire to have a causal connection of something that may be the wrong question to even ask.
It's interesting, both Enid and Lesley, you both touched on the two paradoxically related sides of astrology, because on one hand, you have the universe, you have the sky, you have a sense of the cosmos. But what are we doing with that? We're not just doing space travel. Instead, we're applying it to very concrete situations. People's relationships, their family, their possibility for a promotion, or their fear about getting laid off, their lost kittens. We apply astrology to a number of very ordinary things, but unlike other divinatory systems like Tarot or I Ching, we're actually using the universe to tell us the answer. It's quite remarkable that we have the cosmic chutzpah, or Bertrand Russell was making fun of William James's cosmic impiety. We actually do that, but even though it seems so arrogant of us to look at normal situations in terms of the signs of the cosmos, it has a very powerful resonance with who we are as people. And we think in these terms automatically. In fact, astrology coexists with any culture, any ideology in which we are part of the universe.
See, I don't think that is hubris at all, because I spent 10 years studying a kind of shamanic journey work, sitting in circles, doing rituals. And one of the things that we practiced was divination. And at one point in time, I remember very clearly sitting in a circle, and she passed out envelopes that had a picture inside of them, and the envelope was shut. And she said, by the end of this class, you will all know what's in your envelope. And I said, yeah, like that's going to happen.
Spoken like a true Virgo, yes.
Yeah. But that's actually exactly what happened. By the end of the class, I could see what was in the envelope. And in the discussions that we were having as a group afterwards, she said basically that everything in the universe is linked to everything else. And so the whispers of one part, you tune in and hear them, and you understand the other parts. And I said, but if that's true, then you can use anything for divination. You don't have to have tarot cards or I Ching or even the astrology symbols themselves. Any particular moment in the entire universe can be divinatory for every other moment. And she said, yes.
Yes, I agree. Mm-hmm.
And that blew my mind.
Amen.
That blew my mind.
Yeah.
But it also then I come back to, but I like stars, and they're such a convenient language. I think most of us do, or we wouldn't be astrologers. Somewhere in there we looked up, and I wanted to be an astronaut when I was a little kid.
Oh, I did too.
Oh, me too.
I wish I could say that, but I didn't.
Well then, Lesley, I guess you're just out of the group then.
Well, fine then.
I tease.
I know, I'm teasing right back.
Oh, awesome.
At the age of 10, I had this large poster of all the planets that draped my bedroom, even though I had no interest in science.
Well, I want to say I had a large poster of Mork from Ork, so I'm not sure what that's about.
I'm amazed you'll admit that.
Great show.
Oh, Donna, I can see that I lost focus now.
We all have our ties to the stars, one way or the other.
Well, I'm going to piggyback on that for the sake of the discussion, of our interest in astrology. I really think that, one, we're taught to forget, right? As children, we come in this pure essence and curiosity, and I don't know about you guys, but I don't know any young children without prompting from an adult who are going to go, well, what is the causal effect of this, and what is the scientific... I mean, kids aren't thinking like that unless they're prompted by an adult. Otherwise, it's this wonderful, curious glow of what's going on, and am I connected to that, and I think that I am, and I feel that I am. I know I see it with my own kids. I know I was that way as a kid. Clearly, we're all discussing our connections to this curiosity in childhood. Yeah, so we're taught to forget this stuff. I believe astrology is something that resonates within all of us from the get-go. We're taught to not believe it.
Yeah, I think that's really true. I mean, my daughter is 8, and she's utterly fascinated by mythology. She loves her books on the Greek gods and goddesses and loves reading them. And I do think that's a related urge to astrology. I mean, when we're talking about astrology, we're talking about the stories of gods and goddesses written across the sky and using them as, well, it depends on your school of thought, archetypal realities or celestial intelligences that are interacting with. Either way, it's still interacting with us and those parts of our psyche that are engaged in that hero's journey.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I really believe that children come in knowing that that their connection to the universe is strong, and it's only through the course of interacting with adults that they decide that perhaps they need to drink the Kool-Aid offered to them by the adults, which is slightly, I know, a little bit extreme. I'm just trying to be funny.
It's because we put so much sugar in it.
It reminds me of when my middle son was about 9 or 10 years old. He decided one day he wanted me to explain all the symbols of astrology to him and show him how to draw them. So we spent some time doing that, and then at the end of it he said to me, "So can you tell me something about myself based on my chart?" And so I got it out and I sat down, and after 5 minutes he looked at me and he said, "You can't see that." And I said, "Yes, I can." And he said, "No, you can't." And he got up and he walked away. It won't come no, it won't come as a surprise when I tell you he's a Scorpio.
All right.
So,
that's why people should always refer their kids to other astrologers.
But interestingly enough, of course, he doesn't really talk to me much about it at all. But when he was in university, he would say, "So, Mom, could you look and see if I'm going to pass my exam today?"
Yes, there are no skeptics in foxholes.
So I have a regular person question really quick. This is Deborah, and you guys are all astrologers, and I am not an astrologer. I have just been recently introduced to astrology, and I'm learning about it. So I want to ask you guys, Lesley, you said, can you do my chart so that you can see, to see if I'm going to pass. If you had 5 different astrologers from around the globe do one person's chart, would it all be the same? I'm just interested to know that from a layman's perspective.
Okay. I think that the essential information ought to be the same. However, the possibilities of how that person arrives at that information might be different. Mm-hmm. Because there are several approaches to interpreting a person's chart, and like, for instance, Joseph does Hellenistic. I can't say that I know enough about that to even comment on, give any sort of, oh, for God's sakes, my brain isn't working properly. So I guess that would be my short answer. You want to be able to go and get a core amount of insight and information from each person, but a lot of it would depend on what your intention was. What is it that you would want to know? When a client comes to me, I ask them, what do you want to focus on? Because that's where my jumping off point is. Mm-hmm. Anyone else care to comment?
Well, it's similar to, I think the basic information would be the same. But if you take a person, and there have been studies, you take them to 5 different psychotherapists, you're going to have different takes and different interpretations and different sense of what the information means. And I think there are different astrologers who have different kinds of insight. The information will be the same, but there will be some differences. And one thing that beginning astrologers are encouraged to do is to have different professionals look at your chart to get a sense of the range of possibilities. So it's not like doing an EKG. You get 5 different EKGs, hopefully at the same time. That's impossible. Hopefully you get the same result. It's not like that at all, because astrology is an interpretive system.
But it is similar to having something like an illness and going to 5 different doctors, and depending on their specialty and their training, you will have variations in
That's
what
good.
Yes.
Good parallel, yeah.
There is.
Understand that. That helps me to understand exactly what Joseph said, exactly what Lesley said. That was a really good way of putting that, Enid.
Well, it's there, and sometimes one of the things that I think has followed astrologers from a time frame when they were often being very predictive about, if you have this, this is going to happen, is the challenge to astrology then by the science community was, well, you didn't predict this, you didn't predict that, you didn't predict this, so it must all be totally wrong. But we don't say, well, you got the weather wrong today. It rained. It wasn't sunny. So all of meteorology, all the weathermen are completely wrong. We don't ask that same level of every single time it must all be right. And actually, to me, part of what's fascinating in astrology is when it is wrong.
Yeah.
Why? What was different or what was the same? Those are worthwhile questions to ask, but at the same time, if I know that the weather is going to be rainy out there, I'm going to take an umbrella. If I know my astro weather is rainy, I'm going to be a little more alert.
I'm going to have my box of tissues and my ice cream ready.
Well, on that note of packing for the journey, we do need to take a brief break to talk about all of the Paramania Radio special things that are going to come on in the interim. So go either listen in to the lovely music and the commentary, and we will be back in about 5 minutes or so. So stay tuned. Welcome back to the premiere episode of the Dead Astrologers Society. My name is Donna Woodwell, and I am here with a fabulous cast in the crypt. I am with Heather Horton from the Heather Horton Hour, already on Paramania Radio, one of the old friends from many of our listeners. Also with Lesley Francis, Enid Newberg, Joseph Crane, and we have Deborah Antic and Chad McKenzie as our people at the table who are learning about astrology. So, Deb had a great question when we were on the break, so I'm going to turn it over to her for just a second.
Okay, so my question for you guys, as astrologers, why do you think that more people don't utilize astrology personally? Like, there's looking in the horoscope, but for most of it, that's just about it.
Because they're brainwashed not to.
Well, I'm going to go back to my own experience when my study of astrology began almost 40 years ago, and it really wasn't something that you talked about. You just went on your merry way, because the reality is people just. I think what Heather said is true. I think we were taught that it's not a scientific thing, so. Why would you pay any attention to it? My mother once said to me, how could an otherwise intelligent person believe in astrology?
Well, that sent you on your path.
Well, you know what? I basically went, I guess, it didn't deter me at all. In fact, if anything, because I have 5 planets in Aquarius, that made me even more determined.
I think, Heather, you have an excellent point that people don't know that it's even an option. I mean, I remember back in the day when I started learning astrology, it certainly wasn't on my list of things to learn. I just really didn't want to go to anthropology class. Really didn't want to write the paper on the Zuni Indians that I was supposed to be writing, and it was pouring rain one day, and I was in our local half-price bookstore, and there was a book by Grant Louie called Heaven Knows What. And in the book, it had instructions on how to draw a map of the sky at the time you were born, with all the calculation tables and things. And as I said, I love stars. I wanted to be an astronaut. And it sounded way better than writing about the Zuni Indians, so I bought the book and I took it home. And I followed all the directions. I've made myself a really pretty picture of where all the different planets were at the exact moment of my birth. And I said, wow, isn't this cool? Okay, now what do I do with it? And since I had the book, I was like, well, astrology is a bunch of bunk, but this will be at least entertaining. So I might as well look up all of the descriptions of what, Sun in Virgo, Moon in Sagittarius, and so on down the list actually meant with all. And by the time you get a full birth chart, there's a lot of different interpretations for all of those different places. And so I started looking them up, and in reading them, I was like, wow, this sounds like me. Now, wait a minute. I'm in graduate school. I know about projecting. But this really sounds like me. I was just in therapy last week, and this sounds like a better test than they gave me for trying to gauge my personality matrix in psychology. And yet it's astrology, and astrology is a bunch of bunk. It can't possibly work. And so I did what any good graduate school student would do. I went and got more books. And I seriously, 80 pages later, I had typed in every delineation I could find on my chart to prove to myself that, hey, this is not what I thought it was. This is way different than I expected, and how come I didn't know that this existed? And I think it comes back to that. We're taught that astrology is only those 12 signs that you read in a newspaper, and since it's a pseudoscience and fake, there's no reason to try to research more. At least that's been in my experience.
And there's also the sad fact that because it is considered, not treated all that well, it does have those people who use it to scam others. So often at the college, we get a lot of calls from people who just want to know, I'm interested, I would like to avail myself, but how do I find out if this is someone trustworthy to go to? And that's not easy. And I think that plays a role. I mean, if you're going to spend your money to have somebody tell you something, and usually you're not, just like in any kind of, you don't usually go to an astrologer when everything is hunky-dory fine. So you want to be able to trust who it is you're going to be talking with.
Good point.
Well, and then it depends on the type of astrology being practiced. I mean, the clients I see are very well aware that I will not make predictions for them. If you're coming here for that kind of psychic-like experience, that you're coming to the wrong person, that this is going to be more psychological in nature, and we are going to explore options that the chart presents rather than something that's concrete or black and white. So I think it really depends on what are you looking for.
Mm-hmm. I would agree with that.
And then part of the job of an astrologer is to set the expectations of when we're having a conversation, what can astrology do, what can common sense do, and what the person in the chair needs to do for themselves.
Well, guys, if I can jump in here for a minute, I have two questions. The first question comes from the chat room. And Jean in the chat room would like to know how a psychic medium could use astrology to help when given a reading. And then my question personally is, after listening to you guys talk, you guys are obviously very skilled in astrology and what you do. Do you guys try to separate yourself from that tabloid astrology? The stuff that you see rolled up in the little vials that you can buy and get your horoscope for 50 cents at Big Lots or whatever. So that's two questions.
Star Scroll.
and I'll sit back and I'll just sit back and let you guys answer that.
How'd I know Donna was going to say, I love those scrolls.
I love Star Scrolls. I haven't seen them in forever.
Oh, that's great.
Well, Lesley, do you want to do, since Lesley is a psychic, intuitive, and an astrologer, do you want to take that question?
I guess I will. Well, it's interesting because my psychic ability probably developed primarily because of my study of astrology.
Yeah, I can see that.
And so, I would be doing readings and I would be suddenly getting information that I couldn't point to in the chart, say that's coming from the chart. I think each informs the other, but as a psychic, I practice, I extend from where Heather was talking about. I really believe my job is to offer guidance and content and context as much as next week your Aunt Rose is going to send you a doily.
What?
That's not the way I practice my psychic gift. So for me, none of it, it's varied, it's complex as opposed to complicated. And I think that we're all looking for answers as to why and digging deeply. And so I think that astrology and the intuitive really essentially are great pals. I don't think that they're at opposite ends of the spectrum at all. And for me, that they certainly operate really well together. It's funny, I was talking with an astrologer that I know who told me that because he reads the tarot, that he keeps the astrological part of his practice separate from the part where he does the intuitive stuff, and he said he was trying to figure out how to bring them together, and for me, they just naturally kind of evolved together. So it's really it's like saying which came first, the chicken or the egg.
I sort of want to bring the two questions together a little bit, and I think Lesley gave us a really good example, because all of us have much more going on in our mind, much more clarity, much more intuitive ability than we ever think we do. And what astrology does, as it has for me, is help grow that ability. And it can only grow when we apply the symbols of astrology to concrete things, concrete events. And one difference between the stuff that you find at the supermarket checkout counter and what we do is the stuff at the supermarket checkout counter, which is sort of uneven quality. Some of it's from pretty competent astrologers. They can only be general. They can't talk about you. They can't talk about your situation. They have no context. So you get some really good imaginative recreations of symbols, but it really doesn't apply when you're a person working with unemployment, getting depressed, you have a job, you don't want the job, your husband's fed up with you, and you talk to an astrologer, you get some interesting answers. And the fact that an astrologer can give interesting answers and can provide some guidance has to do with the fact that the symbols speak in a very deep level and that we can access through them some intelligence that we don't ordinarily have when we do it well. So, I think the two questions are related.
Yeah, I mean, that's been my experience too. I actually, since I was doing shamanic journey work and learning to be a channel and to do hands-on healing way before I got to astrology, my first experience was actually doing channeled readings for people. And for me, astrology gave an anchor, a focus point that I didn't have when I was just doing straight psychic readings for people. And I like the fact that it kind of gave a structure and a way of looking at things that said, hey, look here. So instead of being me and this huge cosmos and sitting in front of someone who brought their whole cosmos with them, it gave kind of a focusing lens to the conversation that grounded in a temporal experience. And I know that might sound a little far out there, but it really, for me, having that grounding touch point was a really useful way for me to help people better and stay more focused on the topic at hand.
Very well said. I agree.
Well, and I'd like to say something about all the sun sign stuff. I think that as much as sometimes, we astrologers have kind of a ongoing love-hate relationship with sun sign astrology, and I do need to admit that I do write the predictions for Llewellyn's astrological calendar.
And they are fantastic, Lesley, by the way, and hanging on my wall.
Hey, I write horoscopes too. I like them.
But I think that we need to acknowledge that the growth of that is what has led people to be more open-minded, so that when you say you're a professional astrologer, as I do, people don't look at me as if I have several horns growing out of my head. So, as much as it's as much of an invitation to cross the threshold as anything else. And so perhaps we need to be a little bit grateful for them.
I agree, because it provides some access for people and if they want to go further, they tend to talk to people like us.
Mm-hmm. They do.
Yeah, absolutely. Without the fluff, we miss an open door for people to think beyond what they've been programmed into in their youth with their, fanatic religious perspectives from their elders and such like that.
And, the creative part of astrology is one of the things that really attracts me too. And the fact that we take these general symbols to bring them to the very specific, to tell ourselves our stories. And in terms of the psychic side, there's also, I remember when first getting into astrology and first learning, and some of the people who I was learning with had some very strong psychic capability, and I was always envious that they could look at the chart and pull this additional valuable information out from it. And I was just, basically slogging through the symbols. And yet, as I got more skilled, I discovered that there were times when looking at the chart, the symbols all suddenly made sense in a different way. And think of all the people who pay all kinds of money to go to these courses and things like that to improve your creative, intuitive abilities. Here's one way to do it that is really powerful, and you can create a conversation even just with yourself and your own understanding of who you are. You don't even have to go huge and out into some of those other pieces. And sun sign astrology can contribute to that, at least in showing an echo of what's possible.
Mm-hmm. There's Eric Francis, who's an astrologer in New York, who does write horoscopes himself. I was in on the class he was teaching on how to write horoscopes, and I love the analogy he used. I don't know if you all remember those kind of graphic paintings they had in the malls 20 years ago, where you kind of looked at it and you had to look at it unfocused, and then the image that was in the painting kind of popped out at you, but only if you looked at it from a certain way. He said he likened that to looking at charts, that sometimes you look at the chart and you see through the charts to a bigger reality. And I thought that was a great analogy.
I think you guys have all done a really good job of answering that kind of original question that I had, which was, if 5 different people did one person's chart, would it be the same? And I really get that it's almost like you have to have the person in front of you to be able to, it's like you can read a horoscope's great or whatever, but to be able to read a person's chart, there almost has to be that kind of connection that's not just from the chart itself, but from the individual. So that's really what I got from what all of you guys said, and you kind of went back to that answer over and over, and I appreciate that. I can understand it as just a regular person that doesn't know a whole lot about astrology. It makes me want to take that extra step to learn a little bit more and know that it's all about connection, not just a chart, in the sky or on the wall or sitting in front of you on a desk.
Yeah, I like to tell my clients that I know the astrology, they know about their lives, and the two of us are going to do the interpretation together.
Yes.
Yeah, that's absolutely true, because, I recently did a lecture at a conference we had in Edmonton and said very clearly, you are not your chart and your chart is not you. Each informs the other. So the person has to, it'd be so much simpler sometimes, I think, if we just thought we were those symbols on that piece of paper.
It's saying this. Yeah, it's like saying the map is actually all the trees and the road that you're going up and down. And no, the map gives you some hints about that and some directions, but your own life is what fills in the full picture.
Yeah, I tell my clients, this is your map of fate, and it is your free will to decide how you will manifest these experiences. No one can make those choices but you. And so essentially all of us could have the same chart before us and likely make close to the same references of one person's chart. Mm-hmm. But it absolutely does take the person in front of us to really make it come alive.
Right.
Sounds like she's been reading Jeffrey Cornelius, The Moment of Divination.
And I haven't.
She got there all by herself.
Can I get a copy?
I did say she was the founder of the Traveling Psychic Supper Club.
Oh, that's right.
So I know what you guys are talking about, like having the. I have a couple of girls in my group. We do readings together. I do clairvoyant and automatic writing, and then one does tarot, one does pendulum, and we all get different things. And I'm not familiar with tarot, but the woman that does the tarot gets a completely different reading off the same exact cards that I do by just looking at the pictures. So I know, I get what you guys are saying. I totally get it. It takes the individual being in front of you to just to make that connection. And I think that even though the stars are so far away from us, they're so close to us. And I had no interest in tarot before meeting this woman, Susan. And then now I had no interest in astrology before meeting Donna. But now that I've met and spoken with all you guys, it piques my interest. And it's definitely a fascinating subject for sure.
I love astrology.
Astrology is fun.
I do. I love it. Everything about it.
I think most astrologers do.
Well, I think one of the funnest parts about it is that no matter how much you learn, there's always more. Absolutely. At least for me. I love that. I love that I to beginning class again and again and again and again, and I keep learning astrology out of teaching just the beginning class. It's always new. It's one of those, I think because it is so deep with symbolism. And it's like, well, Sufi tales where you have these simple stories, and yet you can just keep peeling back that story again and again for more and more and more. And to me, that's what the astrological symbols do, is that you can continually peel them back to understand more and more and more.
It's the original never-ending story.
Yes.
Yes.
There's more than one could learn in a lifetime.
And alas, with that, our hour is almost up. So I want to thank you all for coming tonight. I have had a fabulous time with this conversation. I hope everyone listening in has had a fabulous time with this conversation. I wanted to give you a few places to go before we go. We have 2.5 minutes left. The Dead Astrologer Society is on Facebook, so if you'd like to continue this conversation, you can join us on Facebook at Dead Astrologer Society. If you like Twitter, we are just Dead Astrologers on Twitter.
I'm not dead yet. Already a cat. Never mind.
We also have a group on Facebook. That original group I created for my Dead Astrologer friends is still existing, and you may join that and talk amongst yourselves about astrological topics. My name is Donna Woodwell again. My business is Four Moons Astrology, so you can always check that out at www.fourmoonsastrology.com. Lesley has a site at www.lesliefrancis.com, I believe. Is that true?
Absolutely.
Heather Horton is IndigoLifeDesigns.com. She's also got her own radio show on the Paranormal Network, and she's moving from the Heather Horton Hour to Planet Soul, which has some of the grooviest music I have ever heard. So you can check out Heather's show, which is now... When is your show?
We're starting in a week.
Okay.
I bumped it again.
Okay.
Fridays at noon Eastern.
Fridays at noon Eastern, and then Joseph and Enid and I are all instructors at Kepler College, which is Kepler EDU. I strongly suggest you check out the Kepler College website, especially if you want to learn more about astrology. There are always free webinars, free classes, and in fact, on May 11th, we have one coming up on astrology and Star Trek. So for all of you Trekkies and Techies and people who like to imagine alternate worlds and future worlds, I strongly suggest that you check that out. Enid, once again, it's Kepler EDU. Is the stuff up for signing up already?
The stuff is up for signing up, yes.
Well, great. I am so glad you all came tonight. I hope encourage all of you to tune in again in future weeks. We have amazing things coming up that include astrology and sacred geometry, astrology and architecture of the ancients, astrology and Evangeline Adams, and so many more stories we will never run out. So thank you very much for coming tonight, and I will see you all next week.
Yay!